Hey there, it's Laura Dominic. Thanks for joining me on a Plan for Joy podcast. Each week we'll be talking about things that will help you break the cycle of depletion. You know, the one that has you going from doing all the things to feeling overwhelmed, frustrated, resentment, anger, to sucking it up and starting all over again. And instead, learn to break the cycle and contribute from a place of abundance. Are you ready? Good. Let's go. Hello, and welcome to the next episode of A Plan for Joy podcast. Today, I'm going to start off with a little bit of homework. I'm going to say that if you haven't listened to episode 16, which was on people pleasing, I would recommend that you go back and listen to that first before you listen to this one. And then the next thing I'd have you do is, if you didn't listen to episode 6, which is about boundaries, that's kind of like an introduction to boundaries that I did before I really thought about doing a series on boundaries. So I would recommend listening to that episode also. I just didn't feel like I needed to repeat myself. So all the basic information on boundaries is in episode 6. In this episode, what I'm going to focus on is why boundaries are so hard to have and to stick to. Remember in the people-pleasing episode, I talked about how I never really wanted people to be mad at me. That's pretty much the main reason why I was such a people pleaser. Now, you might have a different reason why you're a people pleaser. I also didn't have a very good sense of my own worth. So in reality, having boundaries, really, it's just hard. There's a lot of reasons why you might not be able to have boundaries and create them and hold people accountable to them, and why you might consistently fall back into your people-pleasing ways, right? It's just hard. If it was easy to create boundaries and not be a people pleaser, at least a depleting people pleaser, then everybody would be doing it. So remember, we talked about last time too, that people pleasers are compassionate people. And so it's hard for us to disappoint others by telling them no. Plain and simple. And if we do get up the nerve to say no, it doesn't take much pushback usually from the other person to get us to change our mind and give in. Am I right? Does anybody agree with me on that? Because that was pretty much my MO. I might decide that this time I am going to stand my ground and say, no, you can't do that. More than likely to my kids. And then it would be push, 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 push. And I'd be like, all right, fine. So what does it take to have boundaries? I read the book Boundaries by Drs. Cloud and Townsend, and it was a phenomenal book. I'll link to it in the show notes. And they say that in order to have boundaries, you have to have desire. Do you need to have the desire to have a better life, to be breaking out of the cycle of depletion? We also need to see that setting boundaries is an okay thing to do. And then we have to remember that our yes has to mean yes and our no has to mean no, instead of lying to ourselves and to everybody else. And we need to feel free to say yes or no, right? Not coerced by pressure from either inside of us or outside of us. And that's what we're going to talk more about today, is where that pressure comes from. Because it's one of two places. Either it's self-imposed pressure to make people happy to the detriment of ourselves, or it's unfortunately outside pressure. And so we want to distinguish between some of those different pressures. And we need to feel bad enough and done with being overwhelmed, if that makes sense, in order to fight the battle and gain our boundaries and give ourselves to others because we want to, not because we feel like we have to. And that, again, is the key. It's good to be a people pleaser if you're doing it because you're doing it out of love and abundance and because you want to. And it's not going to come back and make you feel overwhelmed or frustrated or angry or resentful. That's when it's bad. So where does that come from? Let's look at the internal battles that we might be facing that might cause us to not be able to have boundaries. The biggest one for me, and it's kind of like a catch-22, I think, is it's just too hard. It was too hard to keep up with. I have 7 kids, and when they were all little and we were homeschooling and like one kid, I'd be like, all right, I can do that with you. I can engage in this battle. But by the 6th time or the 7th time with the other kids, I just didn't want to fight anymore. I was tired of having to battle because people, especially when they know they can push you and break your boundaries really easily, they're going to keep pushing and pushing and pushing. And so if you put up resistance, they're going to push and push and push. And if you want to not give in, you're just going to have to persevere. And I just never seemed to have the energy to do that. However, if I had just done the work and stuck to it and persevered in my boundary setting, everything would have been so much easier, right? Isn't that the kicker? If you just put in the work, it's like that with anything, everything gets better. It's just that it's like that, like I said, that catch-22, you're overwhelmed, so you don't feel like you have the energy to do the work and to fight the battles. And so you just give in because you're tired. But you knew that if you didn't give in, things would be better. So that's pretty much where I lived for a really long time. Another internal battle you might be fighting, maybe in a different scenario, is that it's hard to leave people behind, even if they're not good for us. A lot of times we'll get stuck in well, maybe it'll be different this time. Or if only I do this for them, maybe then it'll be better. They'll love me. They'll take care of me. They'll be my friend, and things will just be so much better. And so we don't set those boundaries because we're afraid that if we do, we're going to lose them, even though it probably would be better if we did. Okay, so depending on the severity of the situation, therapy is a good option for this because there can be some pretty intense stuff going on here. Even if you don't have therapy, you need a support system, somebody you can talk to and maybe bounce ideas off of. If you're going to try and set boundaries with somebody who might just walk away. But let's take a less severe example. Let's just say it's a mom's group full of wonderful women, right? Wonderful women. You enjoy these women, but when they all get together, the talk seems to just always be negative, always be about the things that are going wrong, whether it's in the world or in their lives or whatever, negative all the time. And you are trying to not be so negative, or you realize that I like going and seeing these women because, like I said, they're good women. They're fun. And I have a lot in common with them. But the conversation, because it's so negative, I always go home after being with them and I'm so depressed. Okay, is that worth it? Is that worth it to you? Maybe that negativity gets into your brain and stays there for a long time. And it's hard to get out of, and you don't want to be that way anymore, right? And so you keep going back thinking, okay, maybe this time it'll be different. Maybe if I try bringing up a topic, that has nothing to do with negative events or things like that, that maybe it'll be different this time. And you go there and inevitably it is not different, and you go home feeling just as bad as you always have. Okay. So that's when you have to say, is this worth it to go to these events just to get out of my house or talk to other women or anything like that? You have to make that decision. And if you decide that it's worth it, then you know what? You just have to deal with the negativity and how you feel afterwards and hope that it doesn't impact the rest of your day or the next week or whatever. Or you can set a boundary that you're either not going to spend time with them as a group. Maybe individually it's better, but as a group, you're not going to spend time with them. Or you can try setting the boundary that, okay, I'll go to this group, but I'm going to let them know that I really don't want to have all the conversation be negative. And could we please try to talk about positive things and maybe have some suggestions in hand and hope that it turns out better. So it's risky here to do that because they're nice women, they're your friends. And if you don't have them anymore, if they decide to kind of like be like, well, who are you? We don't feel like we're negative and we don't like that you brought that up. And maybe they, kind of pull away from you. So there's that risk there. And you have to decide, are you willing to take that risk? Is it worth it? And so weigh the two things. What kind of damage is all the negativity doing to you? If it's doing a lot of damage, then it's worth it to set that boundary and see what happens and see if your life is better not going to those groups. And as scary as it seems, if they're not going to change, it's better to draw the boundary and cut the ties with spending time with them as a group. Like I said, maybe individually it's not a big deal, but as a group setting, you might just need to cut ties, and that's hard and it hurts, and we don't like to disappoint people like that. Another internal struggle you might be having is guilt. They always talk about Catholic guilt. It's a real thing, right? We all feel it, but guilt should not be a motivator for our behavior. Okay, we need to be motivated to do things because of love. If we're doing something and we fail in love, then we should feel sorrow for our failure and not guilt. Okay, there's the difference. According to Drs. Cloud and Townsend again, guilt distorts reality and gets us away from the truth and away from doing what is best for the other person. So guilt will tell us that we're doing something wrong when we set our boundaries, especially if the other person we're setting them with gets upset or angry with us for doing them, for setting that boundary, then you'll not do what is right and you're going to get stuck. So guilt comes from within. It's not the other person who is imposing this guilt upon us. It's us for accepting that guilt. A lot of times that guilt can come from another person in your life who you felt had power over you. Maybe your parents used guilt when they were raising you, or you were always somehow taught to feel that you should be guilty. So you, though, internally, this is an internal thing, you have the power to reject the guilt. Remember, this is hard work. You need a good support system to help you set and hold boundaries, especially if you have to start setting them with everybody, like I did. And so make sure you have a therapist or a group of friends or some kind of support group that you can turn to during the process, somebody to help hold you accountable to sticking to those boundaries. And so let's talk about some external battles. And really, so those are the things that are going to come from the other people that you're setting boundaries with. And generally, they're going to be negative emotions, right? It's going to be anger. It could be really bad anger, physical violence. It could be they're going to try to, like I said, impose those guilt feelings on you and make you feel guilty for saying no. They could be just really genuinely disappointed, and that's going to hurt, right? Like I said, we don't really set out to disappoint people. That's not a highlight of our day. So one thing that helped me immensely when I was setting these boundaries was something I heard on an episode of the Mel Robbins podcast. She had a doctor who specializes in boundaries. But the thing that really helped me was you have no control over how somebody else is going to respond to your boundary, right? That's okay because you have no control over their response. But here's where it got me. They have a right to their response, right? You're saying something that's upsetting them. They have a right to be upset. That's their feelings. But, and here's where I really was like, whoa, really? It's not my job or your job, if you're setting the boundary, to make them feel better in the sense that to take away their bad feelings. Okay. They may be angry, disappointed, throwing guilt at you, but giving in and changing your mind because of that will not be helpful to you or to them. You can be, and you should be, very empathetic to how they feel. So you could say, you know what? I really can't do that right now. And I'm sorry that I can't help you. And I know you're disappointed. Is there any other way that I can help you? Remember, though, that this is their distress and not yours. Don't let them make it your distress. You can feel empathy for them, but it's not your job to take away their bad feelings. And that just blew my mind. Because, of course, that's what I would always try to do. Another thing, when people are angry or making you feel guilty or disappointed or whatever it is, I always had a hard time not going on and on and on, trying to justify my reasons for setting a boundary. I would continue to go on and give this lengthy explanation and all this other stuff, trying to get rid of the guilt inside of me. And I'd feel the need to justify my actions ad nauseum, really. Giving a reason for why the decision was made is fine, but you don't have to grovel for their approval or apologize till they're like, oh, okay, I agree. That's fine. I understand. That's giving into the guilt feelings inside of you. And it's really hard to overcome that. Okay. Again, this isn't easy stuff. Sometimes you will also have to say no to people who really, really need something from you, but you just can't give it to them for whatever the legitimate reason is. These situations will break your heart. You might be inclined to feel guilty, but don't confuse the sadness that you feel with guilt. Empathize with them. Suggest others who might be able to help them. Pray for them, by all means. But if you really can't help someone who really needs help, yeah, it hurts. If you've done everything you can and then you can't do any more, pray for them. Try to find other people to help them, but don't give in to the guilt. The outcome of boundaries is to be able to give to others out of love because we want to give to them, and saying yes to them makes us feel good and not bad. So the action step for this week is going to be to think of all the people you need to set boundaries with. Maybe get out a piece of paper and journal about it. What is the reason why you're not setting boundaries? Are there internal reasons or are they external reasons? What needs to happen for you to set a boundary with them? Do you have a support system? Do you need a support system? So, for example, to set boundaries with my kids, what I should have done if I had known better was to set up a plan with my husband so we were on the same page and he understood how hard it was for me to set boundaries. And then learn how to communicate my boundaries with them with empathy and not frustration or impatience. That's not the way to set a boundary, is by screaming it at somebody. And then to close my ears to the whining. Oh my goodness gracious. Or learn how to better redirect them when they were in that whining phase. But again, you're doing it when you're not at the point of like frustration and resentment and anger, not when you're farther into the cycle of depletion. That's not going to be hard, or that's going to be harder to do things with empathy and patience, right? I had to realize that it would get better faster when I was consistent. And let me tell you, consistency and I never really got along very well. And so that might be a whole nother episode on how to be consistent. I don't know. I'm going to have to learn first. So remember, we're trying to break the cycle of depletion. And setting boundaries is one good way to stop you from being so overwhelmed. Awareness is the key. So this week, I want you to be aware. Where do you need to set boundaries? It's really difficult to go out and say, I have to set boundaries with everybody in my life. Okay, don't do that. Maybe just pick one not so, difficult, maybe one of the little easier ones, and try it. And then, try another one, see how that goes. So what I'd also like you to do this week is to like this video and share it with other mothers who need to set boundaries, who are overwhelmed because they keep people pleasing and keep trying to do everything for everybody, and it is depleting them and sending them down that cycle. So share this with them and then maybe hold each other accountable and try to learn together. You can go ahead and subscribe to my podcast, my YouTube channel, leave a comment. All that would be great. I love feedback. So if you have any feedback at all, that would be wonderful. So go ahead and do that. And then I will see you again next week. God bless.